The shoe stopped an inch from Bruce Lee's left eye, and the whole front row sucked in air at once. Bruce did not. He sat in the guest chair with his hands flat on the armrests and looked, without turning his head, at the white sole hanging beside his face, and then at the young man balanced on one leg behind it, and he did not blink, and he did not lean back, and for a second nobody in the studio breathed. Then the young man grinned and pulled the leg down and turned to the audience with his arms open, and 200 people let go of the breath at once and roared. His name does not matter for the first part of this. What mattered that night was that he was 26 and beautiful and faster than anyone the show had ever booked. He had come out of the European full-contact circuit. He could put his heel above his own head, and for 11 minutes he had given the crowd a highlight reel, spinning kicks that cracked the air a hand's width from the potted plants, a jumping kick that snapped the flame off a lighter the host held up, splits, the whole vocabulary. The audience had never seen a body do those things in a living room set with a city painted behind it. They were his. He knew it. And the small man in the black jacket in the next chair had watched all of it without once looking impressed, which the young man had noticed and which had been eating at him for 9 minutes. The host had lit the fuse without meaning to. He'd asked, in that easy way of his, whether the old styles still held up against what the young man was doing, the beautiful against the effective, and the young man had answered with a smile aimed sideways at the chair beside him. He said the men people worshipped 10 years ago were monuments now, statues, planted. He said the future was movement and speed and reach, and he said it looking at Bruce, and the room understood the look before it, understood the words. Bruce had said mildly that it was a beautiful way to move, and that he'd enjoyed watching it. He'd meant it. That was the problem. A compliment was the one thing the young man couldn't do anything with, and so he'd stood up, told the crowd he meant no disrespect, asked Bruce to sit still, just sit, don't move, and thrown the highest, fastest, most controlled kick of his life, and stopped it a finger's width from a seated man's eye. And the seated man hadn't moved. If you want to see how badly a fast man can misread a still one, stay with this, because what the young man decided that stillness meant is the reason the next 90 seconds happened at all. It was not a mistake of manners. It was a mistake of reading. He looked down at Bruce sitting there motionless with a shoe still hanging in the air between them, and he decided he knew what the stillness was. He decided it was fear. He decided the little man had locked up, frozen, the way prey freezes, and that the not flinching was not control but paralysis. 26-year-olds who have never been genuinely afraid often cannot tell the difference from the outside. He brought the leg down and grinned at his win, and did not understand that he had not won anything, because the man he was grinning over had simply correctly known the kick was going to stop, and had not bothered to insult it with a reaction. The host was already moving. He'd come half out of his chair, one hand up, the practiced motion of a man who has killed 100 bad moments before they metastasized on live television, and he was saying, "All right, that's beautiful, folks. Let's," and reaching for the cut to commercial with his eyes. He didn't get there, because the young man, riding the noise, feeling the room, decided the demonstration needed a finish. He turned back to the chair, and this time he did not announce it, and this time he did not aim to stop. He meant this one. Anyone who had ever been hit could see it in the load of his hips. The first kick had been a photograph, all shape and no intention behind the surface. This one had his weight coming through it, a real roundhouse to the head of a man sitting down, thrown by a professional at full speed on national television because a compliment had wounded his pride. It was the single most dangerous half-second of the entire broadcast, and only 4 people in the building understood that while it was happening. One of them was the host, whose face came apart. One of them was the young man, who was committed and could not have called it back if he'd wanted to. And one of them was Bruce, who moved. He had not moved for the first kick because the first kick was a lie, and you do not answer a lie. He moved for this one before it was a quarter of the way to him, and the 200 people in that studio did not see a technique. They saw the small man simply not be in the chair anymore, there and then, not there, the way a light goes off. He came up and inside, under the arc of the kick, so close the white trouser leg brushed his shoulder as the shin passed over the empty seat cushion where his head had been a third of a second earlier, and his right hand was already out. He did not punch the young man. He caught him. One hand at the kicking leg's ankle, and one flat palm against the young man's chest, and the young man airborne, committed, all of his weight out over a single planted foot that was now the only thing holding up a body thrown sideways, had nowhere to put any of it. Bruce did not throw him. He didn't have to. He turned the trapped ankle 2 degrees and stepped his own foot behind the young man's standing leg and simply removed the floor from the equation, and the fastest man the show had ever booked went down across the low table between the chairs, hard, taking the water glass and the host's coffee mug with him in a spray of glass and ceramic, and the crash of it was the loudest thing that had happened in that studio in 9 years. The audience did not cheer. There is a specific silence that a live crowd makes when it stops being entertained and starts being frightened, and the studio dropped into it all at once. The young man was on his back among the wreckage of the table with Bruce standing over him, not posing, not gloating, just standing, one hand still lightly on the trapped wrist, having controlled the fall so completely that the man had gone through a table without hitting his head. Bruce's face had not changed. That was the thing the people closest to the stage could not get over afterward. He was not breathing hard. He looked exactly the way he had looked sitting in the chair, except now he was on his feet, with a national television star flat on his back beneath him, and a floor full of broken glass, and the calm was suddenly the most menacing thing any of them had ever seen, precisely because it hadn't moved a millimeter. Nobody said anything for 2 seconds. On live television, 2 seconds is a geological age. Then Bruce let go of the wrist and stepped back and put a hand down, not for show, an actual hand, to help the young man up, and the young man stared at it from the floor with an expression that had nothing left of the grin in it. He was not hurt. That was the whole point. He was completely unhurt and completely undone. And the difference between how much damage had been done to his body and how much had been done to everything he'd walked out there believing was the widest gap in the building. He did not take the hand, not out of spite. He just could not. Yet his own arms were not answering him, and he lay there another half-second before he rolled to his knees on his own and got up without help, glass falling off the white suit, and stood there in front of 200 people, not knowing where to put his eyes. The host was on his feet now, for real, both hands up, saying, "We're going to take a break. We're going to take a break right now." And the floor director was already slashing his hand across his throat, and the red lights on the cameras were going dark one by one. But the East Coast had already seen it. Live, every second of it, out to 11 million homes, before anyone in the control room understood that the thing that had just happened was not on any rundown and could not be unhappened. If you want to know what 11 million people saw, and what the rest of the country never got to, stay with this, because this is the part the network spent the next week deciding what to do with. They cut the West Coast feed. That is a matter of record among the handful of people who worked that night and have talked since. The Pacific Time broadcast, on its 90-minute delay, went from the young man's first frozen kick straight to a commercial, and the second kick, and the table, and the glass, and the small man standing over the beautiful young star was simply gone, scissored out, replaced with a bumper and a smiling host who had been calm the whole time. If you lived east of the Mississippi, you saw it. If you lived west of it, you saw a talk show. The tape of the full segment went into a vault, and as far as anyone has ever been able to confirm, has not come out. What Bruce said to the young man was not on the microphones, and only 2 people heard it, kneeling and standing in the glass while the host filled the air above them. One of them never repeated it. The other repeated it exactly once, years later, and swore it was word for word. Bruce said the first one you knew wasn't real, so I let you have it. The second one you meant. He said don't ever aim a real one at a man, because a fake one didn't scare him. Then the commercial ended, and the West Coast came back to a different segment entirely, and the young man was not in his chair when it did. He worked for a long time after that. He got famous, more famous than he'd been that night by a wide margin, and interviewers asked him for years about the fighters who'd shaped him, and for a long time he gave the ordinary answers. Then, once, late in his career, someone asked him the toughest lesson he'd ever taken, and he was quiet for long enough that the interviewer thought the tape had a problem, and he said there was a night, when he was young and quick and stupid, when he'd thrown a kick he actually meant at a man sitting in a chair, and that he'd been on his back through a coffee table before he understood he'd left the ground. The interviewer, sensing something, asked who the man was, and the young man looked at the camera and did not say the name, and said only, "They cut it, you'll never see it, and I've been grateful for that every day of my life."